Looking into it a little bit, Michael Haneke, interesting guy. Watched an interview with him earlier. As I said, this came out in 97 and he wrote the first draft of it in 1967. So this was
Wow.
and like knowing that, it really like, oh, that makes sense. This is something that had been rumbling around in his brain. There wasn't the fourth wall breaking aspect of it. There wasn't a lot of the aspects that we see in this movie, but it feels like something that had just lived in this dude's brain forever. And like he slowly perfected until he had the chance to actually make it. But as I said, first time for me, I loved it. What's your history with it? When did you come across this, and how was the rewatch for you?
So I think I was in like this edgy stage of life where I was just Googling like most dangerous films, most disturbing films. You know, I was just Googling around for stuff like that. And this was on the list a couple times, a couple lists that I saw. And honestly, like it was a list with things like Cannibal Holocaust, Salo, like what's it called? The Serbian
film. Yeah.
So it was like on a list with all of those, which now I've seen all of those movies. But like none of those movies I ever would revisit except for like Funny Games, because Funny Games just like really struck a chord with me. I think I was like maybe like 20 or 21 maybe when I first saw it. I think I rented it from the library on DVD, and like I was just kind of blown away by it. I was like, holy cow. It was just like so different than what I was expecting. It's very like slow paced and like methodical. It was also just really interesting because the like fourth wall breaks just killed me. Like
Yeah.
I'd never seen anything like that in a film before, and I thought it was just like really clever.
The first time that they break the fourth wall, they're playing a game of hot and cold where he's having her, you're warmer, you're colder, trying to find their dead dog. And the guy just turns around and looks right at the camera and winks. I'm like, bitch, the fuck are you doing? Just like in an interview with Michael Haneke, his intention at the first one is to get people thinking, was that what I think it was? Was he winking at someone behind the camera, or was he winking at me? I really think watching it the first time, you'll never experience that again. Because there's so many moments where like in a typical horror film or horror or home invasion film, they're way more predictable. You keep on waiting for the shoe to drop or like different moments to happen that should happen, and they don't. But so tense. I found myself literally twice during the movie that I looked up and I noticed that I was like doing this with my hands because I was like, what are they gonna fucking do? It's like they're so untrustworthy. I just want to ask you about like your thoughts on the introduction, the egg scene, pretty much, where the guy walks in asking for eggs, and just the way that they're just breaking social norms at first that just make you like feel awkward, and how like impactful that is. Like, what do you just think of the opening 15-20 minutes of the movie?
I think it's genius. I mean, it's so mundane, like the neighbors asking to borrow like a couple ingredients, like, but you know, there's just like this underlying tension of like, you don't know this person's real motives. You don't know who this person is. It's not even really her neighbor. It's her neighbor's guests, supposedly. And like, it's just like so unnerving, like from the get-go, because he's just like an unnerving character. He's just like in these itty-bitty white shorts, and he's like got these white gloves on, and he's super soft-spoken, and you know, it's like immediately kind of like uncomfortable. It's like, oh, okay, you know, here, have your eggs and go, please. Like, but then of course, you know, those eggs were really just like the way to get into the house in a weird way, which is just, it's insane. I mean, that's the kind of stuff that kind of keeps me up at night, because it's like something as mundane as a neighbor borrowing eggs, you know, could, you know, in a very rare scenario, turn into something like this. And, like, that's crazy to think about, like just how mundane it was, and how quickly it really ramps up.
Sie haben doch eine 12er-Packung. Und wenn Sie Montag ohnehin einkaufen, dann können
Wir wollen nur die Eier.
Das ist eigentlich alles.
Kannst du mir erklären, was hier los ist?
But it doesn't ever seem like jarring or unnatural. It seems like something that could really like feasibly happen because of all the social awkwardness that is at play. It's just so crazy. It's brilliant, honestly.
Right. I agree so much. Like the direction is really what you feel. Like the Michael Haneke is in complete control of every aspect of how you're feeling and what you're seeing. And just like the subtleties of it, where at first, like you said, he's so feeble looking, but I know in the back of my mind, like, oh, this is the bad guy, or this is one of the bad guys. So you're waiting to see like, oh, how's it going to go down? The first like 10 minutes when it's just those two together, or 5 minutes or whatever the fuck it is, I keep on waiting for him, like, oh, he's about to hit her, or he's about to knock her out, or like take her hostage or something. And like at first he's just so humble. And then you slowly see like, oh, he's got gloves on. You're like, oh shit. So that makes him much more scary. And then just
Yeah.
when she's cleaning up the egg, she's got her back turned to him. She's vulnerable, and you're waiting for it to happen then, and it doesn't. I was thinking about this a lot, like the golf club thing. He's like, "Oh, what nice golf clubs! Can I try them?" The fact that it's in the home, like if we were at a golf course, right? And someone's like, "Oh wow, you've got those clubs. Those are so great. Can I use those?" That's not nearly as weird, but there's something about doing that, being extra familiar, which is the word that they use in the domestic setting, makes it so much stranger, and that's weird. Like something
Yeah.
if you did it at the golf course, it's fine, but at my house, like it's so strange to me. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Yeah, absolutely. And like it's a little bit of a I don't know how much you want to give away. Are we it's just a spoiler show? We're giving everything away.
Yeah.
It's a
Spoiler alert for everything.
yeah, it's a little crazy because it's almost like a zone of interest type of like in the background moment too, because you hear the dog barking and then you kind of hear it, you like think you hear it whine. I don't even know
Right.
if you really do. It's so you just hear it barking, then you hear it stop barking. I might be like filling in the slight whine in my imagination.
I thought the same thing. I'm like, did
But
I
like,
hear it or did I not? And then
yeah,
the two characters kind of look at each other like, did we hear?
yeah,
There must be something there that's very subtle. You
yeah,
know what I mean?
it's
That does make
crazy.
us think something's wrong,
It's
which
just
is
like a really like crazy subconscious way of like getting into your skin like right at the start of the film, like you know, and things aren't even really happening yet, like but
right.
you know, you just in the background and like under the surface, like oh, it's so good.
What do you think of? I'll call them Peter and Paul. I don't know their fucking names. That's one thing that's just cool about them is that they keep on casually just calling each other by all these different names, Beavis and Butthead and Tom and Jerry. And it's very. I heard someone else point this out, but I would be surprised if Christopher Nolan hadn't seen this movie and like borrowed that aspect for the Joker.
You want to know how I got these scars?
Like that's straight
Yeah,
out of this movie. They do this continuously. And the main villain, I'll call it the short guy with the brown hair. He's pretty much a Joker character, like an agent
yeah,
of chaos in the movie. There's such great performances. Unfortunately, the tubby one has passed away since, and
oh
the married couple have both all passed away. And they were actually
wow,
a couple in real life after this. Anna and Georg, they actually
yeah,
got together after this in real life. But when especially the one that keeps looking at the camera, I feel like he's a guy that should be like in collage posters of great horror villains standing
yes.
next to Michael and Freddy and people like that. It's like he's so to me like he should be way more iconic than he is. But what's your kind of take on those two?
I agree completely. Honestly, like I think about the Funny Games characters all the time and just how iconic they are with their like Mickey Mouse white gloves, and they're just
Yeah.
so creepy. There's something really like clean and innocent about
Mhm.
their like image, but then they're just so like especially the brown haired one. um his vibe, his energy, his screen presence is so sinister, and like it's just like right from the bat, like before anything even happens, you just instantly get like this gross feeling from him, and he's so
Right.
creepy. And there's yeah, they're just immediately creepy, immediately red flags, like alarms are going off the second they step on the screen. They're just so good at that.
I would have had the red flag as soon as I saw the short shorts. I would have been like, I
Yeah.
don't know, man, those are pretty short. I'm like, put your hands down to your side. I got to test that. Do the old elementary school test. I agree. There's something, I guess, from what Haneke says, he told the victims to play drama and he told the antagonists to play as if they're in a comedy. And I watched it again after hearing that. They don't really come across as if they're in a comedy, but they do come across like they're in a different movie as the victims, I would say. You know what I mean? They're definitely
Yeah.
what they're doing is they're never reacting to the pain and the agony and the suffering that the victims are going through. They're acting like none of it's they acknowledge it like verbally. They'll say, like, I know this must not be easy and everything, but the tone that they have is that they give zero fucks the entire time.
Gut, also, wie es im Fernsehen. Top, die Wette gilt.
It feels like Uncanny Valley, almost like the way that they are, just the Peter and Paul characters, just like they just give Uncanny Valley. Everything about their performance is weird and uncanny and like just off. And actually, now that you mention that they're supposed to be in a comedy and like the other people are in a drama, like that's really interesting because like
Right.
they do kind of come across like kind of jovial. They have like this like love of what they're doing in a weird way. It's
Mhm.
kind of like a Clockwork Orange scenario. They kind of just have
Totally.
like that like vibe to them, and like Yeah, that's really interesting to think about.
Well, it's just like the juxtaposition of what they're doing to the people against like the fact that it's a game, which is
Yeah.
another thing. It's called funny games and they are playing games with them, but it's not like if I were to describe this movie to someone or someone was to describe it to me, I would have a different picture in my head of what it is. It's not this like, oh, we're playing a game, sit down. It's not Saw. It's just like,
Yeah.
oh yeah, I guess these are games that they keep playing with them. It's somehow more subtle than the way it sounds on paper.
Kalt!
I would say there's about 4 or 5 of these scenes that like are worthy of just like sitting down and breaking down, like really deep diving into. But the biggest one of all, and what I have to imagine is probably the most like iconic and memorable scene from this movie is, spoiler alert, is the death of the son. So we've
Oh,
got the
yeah.
mom and the dad, and we've got little Georgie. The mom and the dad, they're like tied up in the living room. The bad guy with the short hair goes to make a sandwich, and we hear a scuffle going on. He kind of acknowledges it and he just keeps making his sandwich. We hear a gunshot.
Soll ich jemand was mitbringen?
But we don't know what the fuck has happened. And I love the way it just flashes to a TV screen. We still don't know what the fuck has happened. And how casually they're like, now that you've killed one, the other two are worthless to us. And they very quickly say, oh shit, this is pointless to do now. Do you want to go? Yeah, let's go. Okay, fine. And now we're just left with our victims. And we find out, spoiler, it's the kid that died. Mom and dad are left alone. And we're left with this 10-minute single shot where the camera is just sitting on them at this wide shot angle where they slowly react to it. We can kind of get into that. But to me, it's just like one of the more amazing scenes that I've ever seen in my life. Although I will say, I do find myself losing focus. I'm not like laser focused on this for 10 minutes. I'm reviewing the movie in my head and I'm thinking about other things. I'm like, oh yeah, this is still going on. So I don't know what to make of that, but that's the truth of it. But what do you think of that scene, man?
I think that's one of the most horrifying long takes ever. Because when he starts crying, it's like the worst sobs.
Yeah.
Like it's up there with like Hereditary.
Yeah, that's what
Tony
I was
Collette
thinking.
sobs. It's horrible. It's horrible. It's the worst thing to hear.
And that's
And,
5 minutes into the scene.
Yeah, and then it keeps going, and it's just like, oh, it's gut wrenching. And I think it is brilliant that it just cuts to the TV screen covered in blood, because like I think that's kind of what Michael Haneke was trying to say. It's like, horror entertainment is violence, and so we're watching like what it's like a race, isn't it? It's like a car race going by, and there's just blood streaked down the screen, and it's just like a really brilliant visual metaphor. And yeah, I mean, he was really, I actually can believe that he had this in his mind since 1967, now that you mention that, because this is a very detailed, like, there's a lot of visual metaphor in this film, and it's really, that scene, it's the worst. Oh, it's so hard to watch.
It
That
really,
scene,
really is.
terrifying. That scene makes the movie one of the most horrifying movies I've ever seen. I think just to see them reacting to their son's death in real time is awful. Awful.
Right. And I don't want it to sound wrong where I say, like, I think the fact that I lose attention, it says way more about me than it says about the film. Obviously his goal was to make us sit there and feel their pain. And although I do get distracted for moments, like I literally feel like I'm sure all of us have had like some kind of death in our life at one point. I feel those feelings of what I've had when I have personal like people that I've lost. Like it gives you this gut wrenching, like legit feeling that if it was done another way, like he says he never wanted to do a close up because it would feel pornographic, which is kind of like one of those things that people might just fucking say. But it makes it so unique and so different that we're just sitting back there viewing them. And then as you kind of pointed out, part of his point of this movie is like asking the audience, why are you watching this? What is it about you that is making you want to watch people suffer and to feel these emotions? And that's kind of where the fourth wall breaking comes in, which we'll get into a little bit deeper. But another thing about that scene, like both times that I watched it, when the camera's just sitting on her for about 3-4 minutes. Finally, she gets up and she's tied up. She starts hopping over to the TV to turn it off, which I'm thinking, thank you. Turn that fucking TV off. The shit's annoying. But when she does that, she goes across her son's body, and it takes me like 30 seconds to then look up on the wall and see the blood stain that's now revealed. Like it wasn't in the original shot. But there's something about that, the way like I'm really focused on her hopping over to the TV, and both times it took me a minute. I'm like, oh shit, I don't know. There was something. And also, the first time I watched it, it took me like 35, 40 seconds a minute to see George Sr.'s feet laying there on the far left of the screen. There's just something about it. Like, it's done in this way that you keep noticing new things, including the fact that, like, right when it happens, I'm like, oh, they're coming back. But then the scene goes on so long and I'm caught up in the drama that it takes me another like 5, 6, 7 minutes to realize, like, oh shit, they are coming back. You guys got to get the fuck out of there, which is, to me, that's some of my favorite, like that whole chunk of the film where there's 30 minutes left. You know, they're coming back. And to me, that's like, I don't know. I'm waiting for the shoe to drop the whole 20 minutes that you think, oh, this is it. They're about to come back. And then the way that they finally do come back with the golf ball, that's like, that's the best way they could have done it. So what do you think of that, like, chunk of the film? They're cleaning the phone and all, like, just that chunk of the film before they come back.
Oh my goodness. Yeah, I honestly feel the same way. It's like so tense because I think the first time I watched this, I was like, is that it? Is it done? Like, are they gonna? And then I was like, no, the movie's not even close to over yet. Like, they're definitely coming back. Like,
Right.
And then I was like, holy cow, they're taking so long to get out of the house. Why are they taking this long? Like, what's going on? And no, yeah, it was like so tense. And
it's the ultimate make you want to scream with the TV. Chunk of the film. You're like, get the fuck out of the house.
Yeah. Like, just get out, find the closest person you can find, get them to a phone, call the cops, like whatever you need to do, like do it. Like, oh my goodness. And then the ball drops and rolls across the floor, and it's just like devastating. Oh my goodness.
You know what? It just made me think of, it's a lot like The Strangers, where it's like, well, what's the deal? Why couldn't they just get to the neighbors? It's like, well, they're so rich that they could afford this privacy like that. That's the goal. They live on like almost an estate where there's all this land, same as The Strangers. I don't know if I would call either of them estates, but you know what I mean? Like these big lots where you're way more vulnerable in a lot of ways. If you get over the security gate or you get around it, you can't get to your neighbors and all that. That's like way scarier in so many ways.
Yeah. And no one's going to hear you screaming. So like, it's crazy.
Right. The other thing I really enjoy about it is they're split up and we've got the wife out, and the way that we don't know who stopped in the road for her. She gets someone to stop, and that's when we get the reveal. Not only with the golf ball showing them that the killers are back, but then they bring in the wife with them. And the way that they go straight into, okay, how old were you saying she was? 35. So it's just jumping right back into like where none of this has had any effect on them. They've never, like, they act like they've never left, and it's just continued.
Yeah. I mean, the movie like seems to do that a lot. It like plants some things to give you just like the tiniest little bit of hope, and then it immediately says, you shouldn't have had that hope. Like, that was worth it.
Right.
So funny. I mean, it's not, but it is.
Well, I find myself, that's one brilliant thing about the movie, is there are moments where you got to laugh. Like when the golf ball comes up, and even at the end, when you get the last little look at the camera, there are moments where you're definitely going to chuckle in them. Speaking of those moments where they give you a glimpse of hope, the fourth wall bit, man, as I said, we've had a couple times where the main bad guy, the Joker character, I'll call him, like looks at the camera. He asks at one point, like, you're on their side, right? You're rooting for them. What do you want to happen? We haven't reached feature film length yet, but my favorite is the rewind bit where we get this little glimpse of hope where the mom grabs a gun, shoots and kills the fat guy. Well, I call him fat. I'm like 80 pounds heavier than him, so I shouldn't say that. But they're calling him Tubby throughout it. And then the other dude freaks out, finds the remote, and picks up and rewinds the fucking movie that we're watching, and then erases what we just saw.
It's crazy.
It's insane. What do you make of just like the idea in general of all the fourth wall breaking, that moment or whatever?
I mean, I think that's what makes the film so special, honestly, is just the moments like that, because it's like, it is kind of like commenting on horror films and horror viewership and the ethics therein and whatever. But like at the same time, it is still just like an incredibly entertaining movie. So it's like, how can you be so mad at us, Michael Haneke, when you made a film that's incredibly entertaining? But that moment is just is unbelievable. Like, that blew my mind when I saw it the first time. That's
Me too, dude.
It just was like I could see why it would take somebody out of the movie and they'd be done with it from that point on. But for me, that is what makes it Funny Games.
Me
That's
too.
what makes it so special.
I completely agree. What's interesting is when this movie premiered at Cannes, a third of the audience got up and left during the movie, and
Yeah.
that I could see that too, because there's a lot of times where you're like, what is he doing? Like what, like exactly what he's asking the audience. Why are you watching this? I think a lot of people were like, yeah, I don't know why I'm watching this, and they just left. They weren't up for it. But for me, it's like, what's the other movie? And to me, this is so important in like good art. What's the other movie that's like that does it as artistically? And I can't think of another one that. Sure, there's other movies that break the fourth wall, but not the way that this one does. I've never watched a movie like that. You know?
It's a very like unique fourth wall break because it is kind of like, I don't know, it's almost like Rocky Horror Picture Show kind of fourth
Mm.
wall break in a way where it's like inviting the audience to like participate, but obviously it's not Rocky Horror Picture Show. There's no fun, there's
Right.
no dancing, there's no singing.
Right.
So it's like asking the audience to participate in this murder of this family instead.
Right.
Like it's insane. It's a stroke of like crazy and genius all in one. It's just really unique in that way.
It's such an extension of like Hitchcock. It's so Hitchcocky, which I get a chance to say. I've watched now 6 Hitchcock films, so I'm an expert. So let me break them down. No, but just the way that he plays with perspectives, like in Psycho, halfway through, all of a sudden we're on the side of the killer. Or
Yeah.
like I thought Don't Breathe did a brilliant job of doing that, just putting us in the perspective of the bad guy, but so we end up rooting for them. I wanted to ask you, like, do you feel like Michael Haneke is like shaming the audience or just like presenting the question? Because I've heard people debate that. They're like, they don't like it. They feel like he's wagging their finger, like, oh, horror movies are garbage and you shouldn't be watching them. I feel like it's more just like it makes you wonder, like, why? Why am I watching this? What's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I feel like the like more like positive way of viewing what he's trying to do would be like, yeah, he's just trying to make us ask the question. But I have heard a lot of people say, and like, maybe even, and it's been a long time since I've seen like an interview or read an interview with Michael Haneke, so I can't
Mhm.
remember for sure. So maybe even something he said made it sound like he's like wagging his finger. But I mean,
Maybe.
like, he's made a few films that could fit into the realm of horror. So like, I
Okay.
don't think he like hates horror audiences. I think he really just wants people to consciously consume whatever it is that they're consuming,
Right.
And
I like
think,
that.
yeah, like, and I think that's a very important thing for every audience member of any kind of genre to consider.
Right. No, I agree. The one interview that I watched today on YouTube, it seemed to be like a more recent one because he was a pretty old dude in it. He had a lot to say about American filmmakers. Like it was a lot like, well, in America they would have done this, in America they would have done that. And watching the film, you can see he's playing with what we're expecting. The predictability of American filmmakers is a bit of what he was commenting on, aside from just like the bloodlust and why we're watching it.
Right.
What else is like? Have you seen some of his other films? Like, is there because that was the first thought that I had after finishing this movie was like, what the fuck has this guy done? And I probably should have looked into it a little bit more. And I need to see him. Like, has he done anything that's as famous as Funny Games?
I think Funny Games was probably definitely his most famous movie. His next most famous movie is probably Amour, which I have seen, but that movie is so sad. It's not a horror film. It's just like two old people and basically one of them ends up getting diagnosed with cancer and he has to help his wife through all that while they're like in their 80s and 90s. But what's interesting is most of the time, if he has a married couple in his movies, they are named George and Anne.
I heard that. Yeah, I read that.
Yeah, which is really interesting.
Well, he also talks about how like the characters in this film are just stereotypes, and he doesn't say it like a negative way. Like that's part of his point. He talked about like enjoying the fact that he's manipulating the audience with these stereotype characters and then telling us that he's manipulating us and then tricking us into falling for it again and then getting back into the movie and being invested and then turning around and trying to take us out of the movie and putting us back in. And to me, he does it like ridiculously successful.
Yeah. It's like, it's kind of weird because he was trying to pull us out of the movie. I mean, like it certainly worked for some, I'm assuming, but like for me, it's just every single time I'm like more invested. I'm like, oh, we're doing crazy tricks now. Okay, what's next? What's happening next? I want to see.
Yeah, exactly. Well, it makes you notice, right? Like you can't forget that there's a filmmaker at work behind this. So, and it also makes you know that you are participating in it because they're aware of you and you're aware of them. So it just makes for a weird, unique viewing experience where like, oh, he knows that I'm watching this. So he's fucking with me in a
Yeah.
way that isn't always obvious. The other thing I just wanted to bring up, and I've heard people kind of say this as a criticism, we're like, well, it's not super impressive because he's not the first filmmaker to deal with these themes. And I'll be honest, first time I watched, actually the only time I've ever watched Last House on the Left, excuse me, I was like, this fucking sucks. Honestly, I was like, this movie is not good. And like, I didn't get it. It's like, this is a movie I'm really looking forward to watching again now that I'll be honest, my buddy Robbie from Pop Culture Philosophers just kind of explaining what we're doing. We're made to root like, oh, these parents got to get their revenge at the end. And then they do it in such a heinous way that we're like, damn, look what we've been rooting for. It's like they've turned it around and like I've been rooting for her to bite this guy's dick off. What the fuck? And we'll get into some similar subject matter once we get to Dream Home. But it is interesting. Like Wes Craven, he's done that, and clearly he's a meta filmmaker, as he proved with Scream and Wes Craven's New Nightmares and all that. So I could see some influence from that. And Haneke's maybe doing it more on the nose, but in a more artful way, which is what I appreciate about it.
Good.
The ending, they've killed Georgie Jr., they killed Georgie Sr. At the beginning of the movie, at one point, we see this knife. This knife is on this boat and it's falling, and the camera lingers on us like, oh, that knife's important. That's going to save the day at the end. And the way they just dismiss it so quickly, they tie her up, they put her on a boat. She's trying to cut herself off, like, oh, a knife. They fucking throw it out, and then they just dump her completely unceremoniously. They don't even show us her going in the water. They just continue this like scientific conversation they were having about matter and antimatter, and they just move the fuck on, and they forget our main character is dead back there. And then they go to the next house, and they're like, hey, you got any eggs? And they look at the camera again, and we know it's just going to continue. So what do you think of the ending, dude?
One of the most insane endings ever. like it's not insane and like the wow, so many crazy things happen.
Right.
It's so insane because it's just like bloop, it's over. Like what? And like honestly, like it's almost comical just how she goes over the boat. Not in the sense that the character's dying, but just in like they're like bloop, whatever,
right?
It's
right.
Like the movie's over. Like, what more did you want? Like, there's literally 5 more minutes of runtime. We don't have time for a whole fight. Like,
right. And I did catch myself looking at the clock a couple times, not wondering like when's this shit gonna get over. We're just like, how much time do we have to wrap this up? How are they going to wrap this up in 10 minutes? This is something on the second time watching I thought more about. It's like they're clearly not supernatural characters, but they almost feel like it. The way that it's 8 o'clock in the morning the next day. We are kind of led to believe that they're just going to continue and do this exact same thing, and they haven't slept. So like, and they're just as happy. They do eat. So we know that, but it is weird. It makes them, just like I said, pure agents of like supernatural chaos in a way, in a very non-supernatural film.
It's almost like a Michael Myers type situation, you know. They just keep going, no matter what. They just keep going.
Right. You don't imagine Michael Myers going and taking a nap between babysitters and shit.
I don't think he ever sleeps. He's always standing or walking.
Have you seen the remake? Because that's something I should have mentioned. There was a shot-for-shot remake made 10 years later with Naomi Watts and Tim Roth, directed by Michael Haneke. Have you seen that?
I haven't, but I think I want to eventually.
Me too.
I've seen like clips and bits, and like it kind of rubs me the wrong way just because I know the Austrian version so well.
Right.
Not because it's bad. Naomi Watts everyone in that film is brilliant, I'm sure. And Michael Haneke obviously is brilliant. But like it's just something about it. I don't know. I think it's just because it's too familiar in a different way that watching it, you know, the same thing but different feels weird.
Right.
And like it just doesn't. But I will watch it one day, I'm sure. And
me too.
You know, once I'm able to get over that.
He said like in the interview that I saw, he's like, a lot of people have criticized me for doing it and just dismissed it as a shot for shot remake and some bullshit. He's like, but nobody ever asked the question, why did I do it? And then I'm sitting there like, okay. And he's like, and he doesn't answer. I'm like, well, I fucking still don't know why. But I guess there is part of it. Like it didn't do well in America. He thought enough people hadn't seen the movie. And I think even the remake didn't do like quite as well as he thought that it would. But I'm super curious to see it just as like an oddity. of strain. Like how many movies have been remade by this same director, different cast, shot by shot, word for word? I don't know if any have. I know Psycho was done like that, but clearly not the same
Yeah.
director. Oh, you know what? Now that I think about it, another Naomi Watts film. I don't know if it was shot for shot, word for word, but Ring 2, The Ring 2 was remade by the same director, different actors, which is funny because I just watched Ring and Ring 2 with Naomi Watts, and then I just randomly watched King Kong, and I'm like, oh, Naomi Watts again. I forgot
Naomi
that was
Watts,
her.
yeah.
And then I'm reading up on this. I'm like, God damn, she just did like 3 massive remakes in a row. And then I've never seen or heard from her since. I don't know if
She's
she's
like
still
the queen of horror remakes. Yeah.
it's wild. People that watch the show, like I say it all the time, I always watch everything twice. I just like, I feel like I have to watch it twice before I review it. But I did not have to watch Funny Games twice. I did, but I knew that I did it. And part of it was the scenes take so long. You spend so long in each scene that it's so memorable. It's like, yeah, there's the kitchen scene, there's the hot and cold scene. It's like, yeah, I could just like run through the entire movie in my head. And it's, I don't know, there's something to say for that too. It's just like such a memorable ass movie.